The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
We're going to stop and have Kirsten Tolt, the Chief of Staff of CISA, to talk to us for a few minutes about the success and challenges facing their collaboration unit. This is the CISA Joint Cyber Defense Collaboration. Kirsten, welcome.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's great to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about partnerships. And I'll just spend a couple minutes before we get into the great conversation with Robert and Kelly to talk about partnerships, just to talk a little bit about the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, but for those who are not, CISA launched the JCDC last August. And the mission of the JCDC is to unite the global cyber community in the collective defense of cyberspace. And it was really created for three reasons. First, it's to harness that power of collaborative to drive enduring and fundamental changes in technology security. The second is to unite and work in step with cyber defenders, domestic and international, to really maintain that operational vigilance and to minimize the impact of operational threats, severe vulnerabilities, and significant incidents. And then finally, to ensure that operational alignment for cyber defense within CISA's cybersecurity division and really across our agency. And we've done this through a few examples, and I know in the Cipher Brief event in October, I talked a little bit about this, but specifically improving the information sharing and threat mitigation. We've coordinated on cyber playbooks. We've expedited updates to our known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the real results that we've seen this year. Important to understand that these are parts of our process. We're continually working to improve our collaboration and what's being done. But as I did mention in October, and we've talked a little bit about, we saw the JCDC, when it launched, come out with these proactive efforts on how to stop ransomware and other cyber threats. But what's been interesting over the last year is that it's very much been a tool for responding to real events. So a year ago, last week, we had the anniversary of Log4 Shell, and that event happened on a Friday, and we really engaged the JCDC on that Saturday. We stood up the Slack channel to start to share data and information. Earlier this year, we had collaboration with Broadcom to notify the DAX and malware victims around the world. This is where our international partnerships were so important, because we were able to notify on a global scale. As we've looked at this year, we've developed relationships with over 150 certs. And then we've had a lot of different discussions about how the JCDC really helped with our response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We obviously had the intelligence. Last November, CISA launched Shields Up. We developed a plan, a playbook. We exercised that plan. And then, unfortunately, when Russia did, in fact, invade Ukraine, we executed that plan. And that was a plan that was now used by members to lay out the phases and objectives of operational coordination between U.S. government. In addition to this work, earlier this year in July, the Albanian National Agency for Information Society, ACSI, which is Albania's CERT, shared with us different indicators of compromise, which we then shared with our JCDC. Those partners then did an analysis and were able to bring that back to ACSI to help them understand more of what the threat was. In addition, I mentioned ransomware. We're continuing to work to stop ransomware through the StopRansomware.gov campaign, through the Joint Ransomware Task Force, and developing our first joint planning agenda. And I'll talk just for a moment about this. We're going to be releasing this soon, but our 2023 planning agenda for the JCDC, after substantive work over the past month, working with the interagency, with industry, with academic partners, we developed our first planning agenda for the coming year. It establishes our joint defense planning priorities in collaboration with the JCDC interagency and with interagency partners. And this agenda really focuses on deliberative planning for key risk areas where there's the greatest potential payoff, and providing lead time for the proactive partnership engagement and recruitment. So really looking at how we're coming together from this collaborative side. The agenda sets the stage for this effective, focused joint cyber defense planning, as well as working together to jointly shape, plan, and execute. We're going to publish a public version of this planning agenda and frame our joint priorities for the year. There's one more element that I want to talk about before we move on. We're not only playing defense. Through the JCDC, we're increasing collaboration between offensive and defensive operations, including with NSA's Cyber Collaboration Center and US Cybercom's Cyber National Mission Force, CNMF. We've got staff from our respective teams stationed with each other, and we're working together daily to really fuse and join our capabilities. And we're already seeing how this is resulting in success. CNMF shares technical data from its hunt forward operations on foreign networks and visibility of red space with us, which we're using to enable network defenders to enact countermeasures to compensate for controls before attackers even reach target networks. And CISAs in turn has provided CNMF with technical insights from incidents impacting US networks, enabling CNMF to understand, target adversary capabilities and infrastructure. And we've seen how this operational collaboration is really pushing adversaries toward more complex, resource-intensive campaigns that are increasing their cost, slowing their operational cadence, exposing their activities to more accurate attribution. So through JCDC, this NSA Cyber Security Collaboration Center is working closely with CISA to share technical information. At the end of the day, JCDC, we hope, is really creating this model for persistent collaboration between industry and government to develop joint cyber defense plans and to improve the real-time information sharing, planning, and exercising of national threats to reduce risk, to drive down risk where the government is seen as transparent and responsive, and where this collaboration really adds value to the private sector. And I look forward to the panel, Matt. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I don't think there's a better way to truly stand up a panel to talk about improving and making more advanced partnerships than to really lay out how CISA has been doing such great work with the JCDC in its operational and tactical context. So let's broaden out this conversation now by welcoming Mr. Robert Hannigan. He's the former chief of GCHQ and now the chairman of Blue Voyant International, and Kelly Bissell, corporate vice president at Microsoft. Kelly's graciously agreed to lead this conversation on new cyber alliances and how tighter partnerships are forming. So Kelly, I'm gonna leave it in your very competent hands.
All right, very good. Thanks, Matt. And Kirsten and Robert, it's always great to spend some time with you. And what I love about this is what Kirsten just talked about for JCDC and where we've come from. And of course, Robert has come from, I think, maybe a leading force around GCHQ and NCSC in the UK. So I'm excited about really talking about this with you. We've come a long way. So I wonder if, Kirsten, you've already given us a little snapshot of where we are today in CISA. Robert, maybe you can tell me your point of view around partnerships, government to government, government to private, maybe private to private. So maybe you can tell us your point of view, and then we'll get into what works, maybe what doesn't work, and how we can improve. So, Robert.
Sure, it's great to be with you, Kelly and Kirsten, and really good to be joining this session. I mean, you can't point to many positive things coming out of this terrible conflict in Ukraine, but on cyber defense, I think there are a couple of real causes for optimism. I mean, one is cloud, which is very much your space, Kelly. It's shown the resilience that cloud and the tools and security stack that you can get through cloud in a really incredible way. I think that's been a game changer. But the other, as you say, I think has been the partnerships. So the close partnerships between governments, particularly United States, but Five Eyes in general, and Ukraine, but also private sector, Microsoft predominantly, but others as well, both at the kind of strategic level, but also at the very practical, tactical, day-to-day defense level. And I think that's been a real game changer, both within Ukraine and in preventing attacks in the region and beyond. I think there are some reasons for optimism. I think we're getting better at being joined up, and Brad Smith talked about this in June, that hostile states are better at joining up the various bits of their offensive, defensive, cyber, their military activity, their information ops than we in the West have sometimes been. I think we're getting much better, and I'm a huge fan of what CISA has done. I think huge credit to Jen Eastley and Kirsten and her colleagues. The Shields Up initiative, it sounds basic, but the truth is we're still at the basic level in lots of companies I deal with. So that made a difference, and it was replicated in the UK and other countries. So I think there are some reasons to be optimistic about the power of those alliances and partnerships, and they're going to develop further.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you, Robert. And Kirsten, maybe from your perspective, where are we going? I mean, we've made a lot of progress, but what do we need to get better so as we strengthen our alliances or partnerships between public and private?
I think it's a great question because, just a few years ago, and maybe even just a little over a year ago, we were talking about the struggle of the public-private partnership. I mean, for those of us that have been in this space for a long time, we've talked about how it lost its meaning a long time ago, that it was a structure, but not really action toward improving what things are done. And I've shared, somebody said to me a while ago that people trust individuals, they don't trust institutions. And so part of this industry government collaboration is about those relationships and building those relationships for trust. I think, to Robert's point, there's not much about this invasion that is good. One of the elements, however, has been how the global stage has come together. In 2016, I ran President Obama's Commission on Cybersecurity. We talked about we've got to normalize and standardize international regulations. We've got to work together. But without the bodies and entities working together, the bodies of work, the discussions, it was very difficult. I think we have a foundation right now globally with the work that we're doing together with CERTS, with the International Watch and Warning Network, to really make progress on the global stage. We're each looking at our nation, but as we all know, cybersecurity does not acknowledge geographic boundaries. These lines are all blurred, and the importance of international collaboration is critical. And I think as we're looking forward, that's really what the next step is.
And do we have a different approach for collaborating with enterprises versus small businesses? Because we know that if we leave the small businesses out, we've really missed an opportunity. So what's your point of view on this, Kristen? I mean, that's where you came from. I mean, I know that that's near to your heart. So tell me what's your point of view of enterprise versus small business?
Yeah, well, you're referencing this work that I did after the commission to start the Cyber Readiness Institute. And what was interesting about that is, as you know well from Microsoft, is the premise here was in order to help small businesses, we had to make the point that the large businesses are paying attention. So this effort was launched in collaboration with MasterCard, Microsoft, the former CEO of IBM, Penny Pritzker, the former Secretary of Commerce. The point being that the large enterprises appreciate that, it's the old adage, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And we've got to do more to raise the baseline for small businesses, help them understand where those resources are. And that, we often talk about having large companies secure themselves through the literal and figurative four walls. But there's now really a call to action for larger companies to secure their digital ecosystem. So what are those entities that those businesses are relying upon to deliver their products, and how are they helping them, supporting them, sharing resources, sharing best practices? And certainly this is a place where, CISA feels a responsibility to lean in and to be able to help enterprises of all sizes. What we're calling, as we're looking at a priority for 2023, target-rich, resource-poor entities. That we really need to help in sharing resources and aligning with some of the service offerings that we have, but importantly, that exist.
All right, good. And is that the same way, Robert, in the UK and other areas?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the answer for those small companies is they are all part of the ecosystem and supply chain. So I think the next big challenge for all of us, for governments and big enterprises, is worrying about the supply chain and the ecosystem, because most of those companies don't have the skills. And skills are a huge problem, as we know, or the resources to improve their security. It's not they don't want to, they just may not know how to. And so there's an education to try to get them to get better, but there's also to get the big enterprises and government to raise the standards in the supply chain, which benefits everybody, because most of these companies are supplying many different international companies and governments. And there have been some famous examples of the problems that brings. But if we can get that right, that will be another game changer. I think it's going to take time, take some regulation, but that will make a big difference. And I think for those small companies, very much Microsoft's world, the answer for a lot of them will be managed services and automation. There's no way that we're going to fill the skills gap with all the good efforts that we're making in any time soon, because it's racing ahead of us. So the answer has to be improve the skills pipeline, but also go for managed services and automate.
All right, so look, I think this is bringing a bunch of things together because you're right. It is not only public-private partnerships, but it goes beyond to third party risk, supply chain, and on and on. And many of those companies are small businesses, but also enterprises. So we have to really attack the whole market at one time. And then we have to think about vendors, because I play in that space, but this is an ecosystem of us working together. So my question is, and maybe I'll start with Kirsten, how do we see this forming in the future? How do we practically get better in this ecosystem of government, large enterprise, small business, and vendors working better together?
I think as we're looking at 2023, particularly CISA, and what our priorities are, we often talk about the challenge of the threat environment and how the threat environment is increasing. But if we step back, one of the bigger challenges that we're actually facing is the boundless and insecure evolution of the technology ecosystem. So what is the role that we have to ensure that we are really building a secure technology ecosystem? This is where we have the common phrases of, secure by design, secure by default. I've talked about the fact that secure innovation should not be an oxymoron, that it really is what we're going toward. And that in fact, in order to create that secure ecosystem, it's not about suffocating innovation, but it's about managing it and being able to prioritize what does the future of this technology ecosystem look like so that we can support small businesses, large enterprises, government and industry, that we're not waiting for the end user to figure out what secure looks like, that we're actually building that in, and that innovation actually requires and integrates those fundamental principles of security and creating that technology ecosystem that is both resilient and secure for the future.
That's good. And Robert, you have a similar point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are some things that only governments, and Kirsten and her colleagues, can do, and that is around things like secure by design through regulation, improving the security of software development, which has been terrible really for the last few decades. And CISA are doing some great things here, and there's legislation coming. That'll take time, but that's massively important. And also related to the supply chain, of course, because some of these companies are, we know where they're manufactured. But I think for the more practical day-to-day stuff, there are things we can do to help companies identify their basic security posture and their weaknesses. And I goes back to something Kirsten said earlier, which is, it got fashionable to talk about threat intelligence sharing between government and private sector, and it's all great. And there are tons of alliances now and vehicles for sharing, and there's some really good examples and sectoral examples. But the problem is burying people in more data isn't the answer. So unless the intelligence is actionable, something that actually improves the security posture for that particular company, which probably has one guy, almost certainly is a guy doing everything, doing IT and security and everything else, unless you can tell them specifically, here's what you need to fix, here's the priority, not the 1,000 other things you could do to get better. In other words, how do you meet the shields up challenge, for example? That's how we can make practical progress. And I think Microsoft has done it maybe at a slightly level above through its digital threat reports during Ukraine. You've seen some really practical examples of, here's a new bit of ransomware coming, aimed at a Polish company, logistics company. We haven't seen this before. Here's what you do about it. Now, clearly aimed at bigger enterprises, but that feeds down to the smaller too, and it's obviously fed into the endpoint for most products now. So yeah, I think there are practical things we can do to make the threat intelligence actionable, and leave it to governments working together with private sector to do those really big high-level things.
All right, look, well said. And I hope increasingly that guy is actually a gal, or at least balanced.
That would be great. That would be terrific.
All right.
I think we're getting there. I think it's changing. So, I mean, in the UK, there have been some great initiatives to try to reach the half of the population who kind of drop out at school from the computer science thing. But it's going to take time, but I think we are getting there. The United States is ahead of us, I think.
Well, and I think that we're on a journey, but we have a little bit more to go. So well said. So let's talk about threat intel for a second, because it seems like this is my next to the last question. It seems like we have competition in the market around threat intelligence, but every one of us who has some level of threat intel only sees one thin slice. So no one sees the complete picture. And so we have to figure out, how do we work together in this partnership of sharing information so that we collectively are safer? So Kirsten, what's CISA's point of view on this threat intel sharing side?
Well, it's a great question, and it goes back really to the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, because that is the premise, which is how do we build out this group of companies that are technology vendors, cloud providers, continuing to build out infrastructure providers to be able to share data. And to your point, it is rare that we'll get the complete threat picture, but the point is, how many data points can you thread together so that we can look not just at indicators of compromise, but get a sense of indicators of intent? How do we start to contextualize the threat intelligence that we're seeing so we can create an educated pursuit of what we think this is going to look like? And I think the more that we can have that structured engagement and that sharing of data information, I mentioned the Slack channel, which, as we're talking about that, it's data points. It's saying, here's a data point, here's something that we've seen. Is this an anomaly, or is this part of a larger campaign? All of that helps to thread together this broader picture. And I think that's where we are. It's being able to share. I think the other piece that's been so important in the evolution of the threat picture is truly the recognition. I think Suzanne was saying this in the earlier session about what Chris Inglis talks about. In order to beat one of us, you have to beat all of us. Cyber is a team sport. No one entity can do this by itself. That was a concept that, had to be conceptualized. And we're now in the place where entities understand that we do have to work together, that I'm better off if I'm sharing what I'm seeing. It doesn't make me vulnerable as an enterprise to my competitor. It actually raises the industry. And I'll, share something early on. When Ajay Banga was the CEO of MasterCard and we were talking about bringing industry together, he talked very specifically about, I need to bring Visa in, I need to bring American Express, because if the industry is vulnerable, we all suffer, right? If one entity within us. And I think that we're taking that broader concept and building that out. And that really is the future for collaboration.
Good. And that's to Robert's point, which is the signal has to be precise that applies to me, so we can reduce the noise.
Yeah.
Well said. Okay, last thing, and then we're gonna have to wrap up. Crystal ball, this is the magic wand. In the future, what is great? I mean, if we were to fast forward for X number of years, what is great partnerships? What does it look like? What do you think? Robert, maybe I'll start with you first. What does the future hold for us, and how we make the world safer together?
Yeah, so I think Kirsten's touched on a lot of it already, that government has the power to convene and bring these threat intelligence feeds together. That's a slow process, and it's culturally different in the States, I know from here in Europe. But over time, that can be got right, and to share that at network speed, as Keith Alexander always says, and I know he's about to come on, but if you can do that in an actionable way at network speed, that's phenomenally powerful. And I think, big enterprises, primarily Microsoft, but in time, the other cloud providers too, are showing what can be done with the phenomenal telemetry. And Microsoft is the biggest cybersecurity source in the world. It's just got phenomenal telemetry, and has begun in recent years to really use that and put it at the service of customers. And the risk of sounding like a Microsoft salesman, I do think it's awesome, and others will do the same and are doing the same in different sectors. So I think we're getting it. It just takes some time and takes some organization and breaking down some of the unnecessary barriers.
Right, and then this is where we need Amazon and Google and Apple and Cisco and Palo and a bunch of others together. So all right, Kirsten, I'll leave you the last word, and then we'll go back to Matt. Any last parting points that we need to think about as far as the future, or a homework assignment for everybody on the call today?
Well, I do think that we know that security and resilience only comes through partnerships. That approach, that concept is very much enacted in our ability to work together. I do like what Robert just said about government as a convener. I think it's important. Government doesn't always need to be the author. We don't need to drive the change, but we have an opportunity to convene and to be able to bring these trusted parties together to continue to share. And that idea that we start by creating that structure and those partnerships. And then, as Robert said, and then we get to where it's done rapidly. And to the earlier point, it's about contextualized data. So we're not trying to, decrypt a lot of anonymous data, but that we're really looking at the contextualization, but that this all happens by supporting secure innovation, a resilient infrastructure that creates not just the future that we're looking to achieve, but really creates a future that we can all align with and know it represents progress and innovation.
Very good. Well, I'm getting the hook. Suzanne, thank you for letting us go over a little bit. Kirsten, Robert, thanks for spending some time talking about this, really what we got to get right, this partnerships in this market so we can make the world safer. So Suzanne, back to you.